having that opportunity to ask somebody, I think, is one of the biggest things that we often don't allow ourselves anymore, is because we're often afraid to ask those things. And, I often tell people, if you come to, an Aboriginal person, ask them what they prefer to be called. And often I say, well, I prefer to be called Christy, first of all. But people say, well, where are you from? Asking someone should not be as hard as it is these days. Often I think people are hesitant of offending somebody, and if we get away from learning to ask and have dialogue, I don't think we're going to get very much further than what we have lately. As a result of some of the discussions that we've been able to have in our community, the urban context can be quite different than on reserve. In the urban area, you're working with so many more groups, you're working with politics, you're working with money, you're working with all different areas that can often impede some of the work. But there's been some fantastic things that have gone on here in Calgary. There are a great number of people involved in this area, and not just our human rights domain and be able to get some of the work that they've been able to get done, but there's numerous other aspects. They're working with the Urban Society for Aboriginal Youth on their anti-racism movement. The Calgary Police have wonderful programs, Hate Don't Buy In, and they have cultural camps, which are absolutely fantastically done. There are different ways to have these discussions. It doesn't always have to be so formal. I think often the best way to have discussions with people is in those informal ways. Sit down and have a coffee with someone. Find unique ways to do that. CPS's cultural diversity camps are a wonderful way that they've been able to engage people in these types of discussions around understanding culture. And just some of the feedback and getting from some of the officers that have attended the camp, saying, I've been in the force for 13 years and I've been to numerous trainings, and this was the first time I actually opened my eyes and made me think. And creating that environment that was safe but unique and different. I think being in an urban center, I think that's what we need to do. We need to start working more collaboratively and not be afraid to ask those questions and have those discussions. A lot of the questions that we get in the urban center that we often field are things around getting things for free. What are some of the stereotypes and myths that you see in the media? And it's unfortunate that those exist. And part of, I think, all of us here being today are about changing those attitudes, understanding those, and changing people's perceptions and understanding. It's about getting the facts and being okay with having someone come to you and ask us questions. Even if I've had people come to me and, I don't want to sound offensive, and I said, well, if you're asking a question, it's not offensive, it's you exploring to understand your knowledge. And for that, I thank you for asking me. And yeah, I think there's going to be a lot of other discussions. I don't want to go too much into everything that I have here, but overall, I think it's having that understanding that difference between urban and reserve. There are very big differences in understanding those, but I think I'd really like to focus, as a lot of our expertise is in the urban center, and given that we're here in Calgary and all of you are here as today, I think it's asking ourselves, how do we all work together? How are we all more better champions and ensuring that the correct information is out there? How do we all sit down and have those conversations and move forward?
Well, thank you very much, Christy. It was certainly, Marie, your presentation spoke to that incredible history that I don't think, well, I know most Canadians don't understand. I would dare say probably many, I'll just use the term Aboriginal people, don't understand, don't fully understand the situation and the real backdrop. And how do we deal with that? You mentioned, and I agree with you totally, that to start the forgiveness cycle, you first of all need the apology. That's the first step of the cycle, and we see some of that happening. But how do we move to the next level, both within the Aboriginal and non-Aboriginal community? You can both respond, and I'll just ask them first.
Sure. Well, I think any change starts with education. And I would think it's probably a good bet that most Canadians do not truly understand the history and the relationship of our Indigenous people with the rest of Canada. The fact that Christy mentioned that people don't know what to call an Aboriginal person. Are you Indigenous? Are you First Nations? Are you status? Are you non-status? Are you Métis? Are you Inuit? Are you Eskimo? What are you? Yeah, and when we don't have that level of understanding, what we create is this concept of the other, the other, this person, this group that I don't truly understand, and I think everything else starts with building a level of education. Now, there are some great initiatives happening right across the country where this type of knowledge is being incorporated into curriculum, and it absolutely has to be. It has to start with children. When we create knowledge, we create awareness, and we can ultimately make significant change. But I do want to address this issue of forgiveness. I was talking over the Christmas holidays with Wilton Littlechild, and Willie is one of the commissioners in the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. He is one of the authors of the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People. He's an international lawyer. And as he travels across Canada, I asked him, while you were collecting these incredibly sad stories of abuse and intergenerational pain, where does the forgiveness piece come in? Because if we, as Indigenous people, are going to move forward, forgiveness has to be a critical part of that. And Willie said, those of us who have been able to move forward have been able to find it in our hearts to forgive. But the pain is so deep and it's intergenerational that some people will never be able to forgive, and we have to understand that as well.
Absolutely. I think, apologies is an apology, but again, if one person's not willing to accept that, then that's where they're at, and to be okay with having that put in place is definitely there. And moving forward, I think in this area, it's such a big, vast area that we look at, and I think there has been wonderful change and wonderful movement forward in this area, and it is education, it's curriculum, we're seeing that happening, there's wonderful programs happening, and I think moving forward beyond just, education, I think action is one of the things that I think we need to work on as well, and not sitting back on the sidelines anymore and actively getting involved, engaged in things. And you often think about, if you sit back and think about, have you ever been in a situation where you've had to step into action? And when we ask people if something were to happen in front of you, would you step in and say something? And most people are like, oh yes, absolutely, I'd say something. But until it actually happens to you, we often get in that fight or flight mode, and you'd be surprised at how different sometimes you may act around that. I've been put into situations where, like most people, if you've come up against things, being put in situations, being called names, or you've seen something going wrong in the community, having to have those opportunities to stand up and say that that's not correct is often the biggest step that someone can take. And I think we all need to find that within ourselves. It's often we tend to shy away or end up, looking to someone else to back with us, but having that self-esteem and having the education and knowledge ourselves is one of the biggest steps that we're going to have to take in order to be really proactive and moving forward.
Thank you for that perspective. I had mentioned to both Marie and Christy that this is many years ago now, when I was in high school, we didn't have any reserves or settlements near my hometown, and it's actually something I just never thought about. I didn't have positive feelings or negative feelings. I just didn't understand. And it wasn't until many years later, after I had stepped down as mayor of Calgary, and I had just been awarded the Chief David Crowchild Memorial Award, when this woman came up to me. She was my age. She was one of my classmates in school. And she had tears in her eyes, and she told me how she always was deathly afraid someone would find out that she was Aboriginal. And I was blown away. I her skin was a little bit darker, but I hadn't thought about it. Again, it wasn't, but you had this woman who lived with this for years and years and years, and you mentioned it, Marie, and I think Christy, you're a little younger, you probably had less of that issue, but it was there, it was real. And it begs the question, how do you engage? You know, we can't legislate solutions. We need changes to some legislation without question. But I'm a firm believer that the solutions are within us. And one of the biggest challenges is, I think, in encouraging, especially young Indigenous people to identify with their heritage. What are the barriers? And in understanding the barriers, maybe we can have a bit of a dialogue around how we can address some of those. Start, Christy.
Well, yes, I've had my own experiences with that. Unfortunately, growing up, you know, I think at a young age and having to understand, you know, when you're a child, being faced with comments or racial things and going home and asking your parents, what does that mean? Why is someone calling me that? And, you know, having, you know, kind of the reality of the world, unfortunately, come onto a young child is often one of the more unfortunate things that a parent has to deal with. But I think engaging youth today, I think, is one of those things that I think we can do, particularly in an urban center. We are very fortunate that we have a lot of the partners, you know, in and around town who are willing to step up and do that. Again, going to the school systems, I think, is a big opportunity to make those changes. And over the last years, I know that there's been some wonderful strides in doing that. I think not just education, but you're having to look, you know, at role models. I mean, Marie, Al, and I, and others in this community are doing this work, but, you know, I'd love to see, you know, GlobalFest do like a youth connection with that. Have the youth come up here. They need to also be the voices of this work and work with us. And how do we do that? There are great youth groups. There are opportunities to connect with youth, and youth at the same time are looking for opportunities to connect with us. You know, and it's in urban areas, it's often hard to figure out who's doing what. You know, and I think part of, you know, the successful things of today, like GlobalFest, this is an opportunity to start that dialogue and engage with each other. And I see there's a lot of youth in the audience, or younger people in the audience. And, you know, I look to you guys as well as you know, younger people, as colleagues, as community members, as Calgarians, to approach, you know, Marie, approach myself, approach a lot of people in this room and say, how do I get involved? And, you know, often people think it takes lots of time and energy and money and things. Well, no. I mean, you're here today, so obviously you have an interest in this area. You're curious. You want answers. You want questions to be discussed. Now's the time to get engaged. Just as simply as this is getting engaged, is having this go for coffee, get engaged.
There's another piece to that. You know, this is a little bit like the layers of an onion. You peel one, and there's never one solution or one answer to anything. There's pieces of it. But one of the pieces is the importance of building a sense of pride, and a sense of pride in self and in culture with our young people, and in fact all of our people. That has been removed for so many generations that it takes a long time to build that. But the kind of work that Christy and the United Way and other organizations are doing when we focus on youth really do focus on that. But there's another piece of that as well, and I think what we need to do, not only for Indigenous people but for all Canadians, is to find a way to effectively harness the power of the media. Because the media often will pick up on issues that are provocative. So we don't necessarily get the story behind the story, and that's how most of us get our information. And I think there is an opportunity to do this. You know, I say somewhat in jest, we have this kind of Justin Bieber syndrome that developed a couple of weeks ago, and if any of you were not around and you heard that Justin Bieber was doing an interview with a journalist and was asking about his Canadian roots, and he made a comment that he thought he had some kind of blood quantum that made him Inuit or Eskimo or something like that, and as a result, in Canada, he was entitled to getting free gas. So when someone like Justin Bieber, who has such an incredible following, makes a comment like that, you can guarantee there are going to be an awful lot of people who take that as the gospel truth. So I think there's another piece here in terms of harnessing the power of the media.
Thank you, Murray and Christy. One other thing that has always bothered me is that I'm aware of and I know of very tragic situations, primarily unreserved situations, but tragic situations that people are in. But it seems that all of the focus of our media is around those examples. And yet there are some, I know across this country, there's some tremendous examples on reserve and within the urban areas that are really uplifting, but they don't get the coverage. Could you just maybe tell the group about a few of those and maybe some perspective on what we might be able to do to put this issue into context at broader level?
Sure, absolutely. The work that I do primarily across the country, and I work primarily with Indigenous communities who are engaged in economic development initiatives. And what we never hear, because it never makes the news and it never makes the front page, is all of the incredibly successful First Nations who are working very hard on issues of education, who are working on economic development, who are gaining control of their lands and their resources. You know, one of the modern day treaties that was signed just a decade ago was the Niska in the Nass Valley, who for over 100 years were attempting to settle their treaty with the federal government. And they have, gained control over their systems and processes. When we look in our own province, we have incredible examples. The Fort Mackay First Nations, who work very, very collaboratively with the oil sands, have 15 companies that bring in hundreds of millions of dollars, and they are all entirely focused on working collaboratively with corporations. When we look at things like the pipeline discussions, issues of civil disobedience where roadblocks are put up, if we look at Burnt Church or Oka or any of those, we get a bit of a skewed version of what is happening. Yes, there are issues of land, and yes, there are conflicts, but there are many more issues and examples where First Nations are doing incredible things. There is a First Nation in Manitoba that is called Wewesikapo, and they in the last 18 months, because they started to work collaboratively with the province on education funding, have been able to get equal funding for their on-reserve students. And in 18 months, they are seeing incredible changes with the academic performance of their students, because on-reserve schools are funded anywhere from a half to 3/4 of other schools right across the country. And when you have that kind of funding, you cannot attract teachers, you cannot engage students, and you do not end up with the kind of quality of education. So lots and lots of examples.
Yeah, there are many examples I think often don't get into the media or people's radar screens. You know, I work at the Calgary Urban Aboriginal Initiative, as mentioned earlier, and we're a grassroots initiative that works, with 3 staff, and the remainder are all volunteers, a few hundred people that are involved with us at various levels. One of the areas working in is obviously human rights. And being one of the domains that we work in back in 2005 is when the community said, we still think this is an importance. Yes, we realize that human rights touches in all areas, but we still want it to be standalone and work in this area to do something for our community. forever and a day have we been consulted and talked, what should we do? How should we address issues? How should we address gaps? And one of the issues that came up was looking at how do we provide educational opportunities for the community to have dialogue around education, to have discussions, to become more informed.
They're coming. Switch on, maybe.
We've been told that they're coming.
Can you hear us?
Can you hear us without?
Okay.
Yeah.
Probably better than with all
But the problem is you need the mic because it's being taped for Shaw. And if it's not,
It's the speaker. It's the speaker. There's a.
so I apologize. I think you'll have to use the mic because it's not doing that on the tape.
Can we just turn off that speaker?
If you could turn on, maybe it'll go away. Maybe there's a gremlin.
Testing.
Okay, let's try that again.
And do not look at the speaker.
Just ignore it.
So as I was saying, the human rights domain is very grassroots based, volunteer driven, and a lot of that, I think the success is that they really have not really celebrated completely, with the creation of an Aboriginal human rights and education support worker. That was done in partnership with the community coming together to say, we still need support in understanding how to file complaints. What does that mean? On average, the Human Rights Commission has an average about 3.4 to 4.4% of their complaints are from Aboriginal people per year. That's extremely low when you think about some of the stuff that we see in media. And part of the work that the Human Rights Domain is doing is trying to create those opportunities for education, working with the education support worker to create materials to help people be more proactive, find the supports in this urban context, because in a city of 1 million people often are afraid to make complaints, afraid to go forward, don't know where to go. The Human Rights Domain has been very instrumental in helping provide knowledge to our community in the urban area. And we've been very fortunate in having those partnerships, those right partnerships, to work in the human rights domain. We have wonderful collaborations with the commission, with police, with community members, with elders, and having those discussions and sitting down and all being on the same page and working together to move forward, I think has been one of the more great news stories that out of Kauai that really hasn't got a lot of the attention that I think it deserves and it should be. The domain volunteers work extremely hard, and without their commitments, a lot of the work that we do, we just wouldn't be there. And there's not just the education, we have our education domain, we have our justice domain. So creating those opportunities to have people come together and having the community identify what they see as action steps, I think is one of the biggest things that we've seen as a positive in the community, is having people identify their own solutions to the problems. And, having CPS work with the Don't Buy In campaign, having, United Way and working at the Full Circle, having those opportunities to meet with people who can also be your greatest champions, I think is one of the ways that we'll see that go forward.
There are other initiatives that are happening right in our city that bear mentioning as well. Christy talked about the United Way. The Upstart Council of Champions brings together a couple of dozen or more of our community leaders, the police force, corporate leaders, the not-for-profit organizations, the focus on youth and ensuring that our kids get a good start, and we have an Aboriginal component to that. The Tom Jackson Stay in School initiative, which is specifically focused on Aboriginal children and encouraging them to stay in school, because we, even in this city, have an unacceptable dropout rate that is certainly not as high as in rural communities, but is very, very high. A brand new initiative that has just been started by Rob Cardinal, who's an incredible First Nations astronomer at the University of Calgary, has just launched the first Light Initiative last month. And his objective is to put telescopes in every First Nation across this country as a vehicle to encourage youth to develop an interest in science and technology and ultimately in education. And we could probably go on and on and on. There are so many examples of very, very good things that are happening.
Great. Thanks to both of you. Now, I hope I could spend all day just asking them questions, because there's some, they're both Christy and Marie are extremely knowledgeable in this area. But I think I'm going to start. I mentioned around 1 o'clock we're going to open it up to the audience. I'm going to change that. I'd like to open it up a little bit sooner, and if there's a lull in questions, then I can always bring a few more in. But it's meant to be your forum today, and I'd invite anybody who would like to ask a question to come down to the mic, and if you could just be sort of line up. And again, the only rule here, we'll try to keep the rules very brief, but the only rule is we'd like you to not have too long an introduction to any questions, so we can get through as many as possible. So, with the first question.
My name is Judy LaPointe. Let's take that courage to come up and say something. I am homeless, staying with a lot of Aboriginal people. I've experienced human rights, and my observation is, in Canada you have zero human rights unless you can afford to pay for it. I've observed every system that we live in is dysfunctional. We have a justice system that can't tell the difference between right or wrong. We have a medical system that just profits off labeling people. The name calling that you don't like seems to be, as soon as you are the victim of this dysfunction, then you're mentally ill. The only help you get are the pills, just like the alcohol was to natives, which I really don't understand the native. No matter how much I meet people, there's always something new, another level that I had no clue was going on with native people. But we are doing that with other people that are in the poverty level. The victim of abuse. No matter what, you're going to live in poverty and you have no human rights. The research that I've done, as soon as I left abuse and started getting I knew I was mentally healthy, reacting from abuse. So I did a lot of research and found a science that has been curing every form of mental illness, addictions, cancer, AIDS, based on causes. Stop what's causing us from being mentally ill, stop what's causing us to have cancer, stop what causes us to have addiction, face that, and be the solution of it. But I can't find anybody that's interested in a new way. I mean, the DI, we're trying to end homelessness. All I'm saying is a lot of people giving themselves really high wages, labeling people to be mentally ill, to put them into mental buildings. That's going to increase our taxes because it's going to increase crime, it's going to increase our mental cost, and it's going to increase our social problem and not get rid of homelessness. But I can't seem to find anybody that's interested in actually what are the hard solutions.
Yeah, I think the gist of the question is one more of with poverty and a sense of or a sense that the institutions are not responsive. What can we do about that? And Marie, you can start.
Yeah, Judy? Yeah, thank you, Judy. Thank you for having the courage to come up. It's not easy, I know. I think there is an issue that you're talking about here, and it's root causes, right? And when we're going to look at any issue, any societal issue, we have to look at the underlying root causes as opposed to the symptoms. And I think that's the fundamental piece that you're getting to, however we get there. From an Indigenous perspective, what we are dealing with is something called colonization, this colonialism, right? That essentially took away language and culture and some of the fundamental bases of who we are as a people, regardless of who we are. We have to have a sense of identity. And when that is legislated away from you, we now have this incredibly difficult challenge to decolonize. And from an Indigenous perspective, when we talk about decolonization, it doesn't mean going back to the way things were 500 years ago. Decolonization is about overcoming past grievances, settling land issues, having a pride in culture, healing, dealing with this victimization and becoming victorious as opposed to a victim. It's a very, very complex issue, and it requires many, many parties, as you have pointed out, to resolve it. Not only the people who are dealing with, not only our school systems, not only our post-secondaries, our governments. It's a collaborative effort that's going to make this happen. So thank you so much.
Can I make a suggestion? If we're looking, how do we solve problems? Can you research holodynamics? It claims to be a tool that can solve every problem known to the human experience. It has had much higher success rates with addictions, been curing most illness, well, every illness that's causing us to be sick based on causes. Its flaws, it can't recognize the unknown problem, make a complaint or an excuse, and use the tool, and you can solve every problem. But we need people like you to read this new form of science that's healing. Thank you very much.
Next speaker.
Hi, thank you so much. My name is Cindy. I'm a second year youth justice student at Moderator College. As a visible minority, I came here 2 years ago from the mainland China, and there is a myth about Aboriginal people in my community. I know that. It's about free money for Aboriginal people for doing nothing. That was, before I started in this program. So in my first year study, I had that privilege to have Aboriginal elders coming to our class and educating us about what happened in terms of history to Aboriginal people. I was so panicked and upsetting about what happened because I believe justice is the key word in my agenda. This is why actually I kind of started learning in these issues, and I'm very active in taking part in such kind of activities, and thank you so much for offering us this opportunity. And to be honest, I know as one person, I only can do so much, but my belief is I will do what I can to educate Chinese people about this Aboriginal myth in Chinese community, because I will be happy to offer fair and kind of no judgmental environment to Aboriginal people. Because in my daily life, I volunteer at the Jopping Center, Distress Center. I learned so much tragedies. I know so much are happening in our lives, but I believe we have to deal with, one by one. So I believe this is kind of privilege. Back to the educational part, my Caucasian classmates were very angry because they knew nothing about this, what happened to Aboriginal people. So I believe education to the public, like today, to raise the public awareness about what happened to Aboriginal community, that's fair enough. So I will do what I can do, and also I will try to kind of promote education to let more people know what happened. I believe it will reduce hate crime, and hopefully we can do our parts to make our society more beautiful and more lives are more enjoyable. Thank you so much.
Thank you for that inspirational.
Sorry, because I'm very emotional. And also, the question is, in terms of education, what shall I do or we do more to educate the public?
you and Christy had talked about some initiatives reaching out to other communities. Maybe you could give some examples.
Thank you so much, Cindy, for sharing. I've seen you at a couple of events, so it's great to see you back here again. I think for ways that you get involved, I think definitely, keep reaching out to our community, volunteering, be a part of committees. I mean, our HR, our human rights domain is always looking for people to be engaged with them. We have social service domain, we have employment, we have education. There's so many ways for you to get engaged and be a partner with our community. There's numerous agencies that I think would agree with me in this room that would love to have you involved. I mean, that's why we're all here. It's this, example of having someone stand beside us and be with us. Volunteering, offering to maybe co-present with us, or anyone else in the room. Any other agencies I know are often looking for ways to work with you. If you're in school, maybe there's a way to, invite us in to the classroom to help co-present on differences. We've been to, there's wonderful things where there's a diversity breakfast that's hosted every once in a while that brings people from different cultural groups together, and we've been fortunate to be there as well to have those discussions and understanding each other, understanding the issues that, we all may have in common, but understanding it from each area, I think, is one of the best things that we're going to see. And I encourage you to definitely, get my card or come speak with me afterwards.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Cindy. I think there's another piece, and when you are talking with your community, or when any of us are talking about this, it's important to recognize that the things that we are talking about are not ancient history. And that's important. This did not happen 100 years ago or generations ago. The last residential school closed in 1996. Until the 1970s and the 80s, we had the Sterilization Act in Alberta, where Indigenous people were being forcibly sterilized. We had Project Paperclip that started after the Second World War and went right into the 70s, and it was a CIA initiative that used children from Aboriginal schools in physical and mind control and drug experiments. These are all historical facts. So when we talk about the things we're dealing with, we have to make the point that healing will take generations. This did not happen in a heartbeat, and it is not going to be fixed in a heartbeat.
Now I think there was a woman right here. I'll just ask whoever wants
I might be next, I'm not sure.
Yes.
There was someone
Yes.
before me? Okay. I'm Del Major. I work as a social worker in Calgary. I'm a Métis. It's important I qualify that, because I think, like most presentations on Aboriginal issues, and I thank Marie for this, that they're bringing the Métis voice out in the presentations that often get lost. And actually, the Métis, just a quick thing, is the largest Aboriginal community in Canada. There's hundreds of thousands of us that are, yet we're so diverse. There's so many different Métis communities out there, including Calgary and in different communities. So there probably was a Métis community in your community, you just didn't know it, Mr. Duerr. My question is, how can we become more, what would you suggest, Dr. Delorme, about helping a Métis person feel more Métis centered, I call it Indigenous centered. What can they do as a young person, an adult, an elder, that feel disconnected as a Métis? How can they bring their presence forward in a country that I believe is going through colonization? Colonization, in my theory, in my belief, will never end. Been going on for over 2,000 years. It's not going to end. Continue on. Decolonization, like you said, occurs. How does that happen for a Métis person in this country?
Yeah, that's a very, very good question. The Métis, we have always been known as the forgotten people, because we did not fit cleanly into a First Nations or an Indian category, nor did we fit into a European or Caucasian category. And I came of age in the 50s and the 60s, and when I used the term half-breed, that was the term, that's what we were called. We were the half-breed, family in the community. But in regard to your answer, or an answer to your question, I think one of the first pieces that we need is to get in touch with our culture and who we are. And the best way to do that is to be with other Métis people. Every Métis person I meet, I encourage to become involved with the Métis Nation. We have an incredibly powerful Métis Nation in Alberta. We have political leaders like Audrey Poitras, and Marlene Lands and the late Ephraim Bouvier, who have done incredible things for our community from a legal perspective. We were finally recognized in 1982 when the Constitution was reformed as Indigenous people in this country. I think it's get involved, understand our culture. The Michif language is a dying language. There are very, very few of our people who speak it. I don't speak it, my father did. Loss of language is fundamental to loss of culture.
Thank you. Next speaker? Oh. Yeah, I think you were next. Okay.
Sorry. Hi, I'm Emily. I'm a student at the U of C. My question is actually relating back to what was mentioned before about the myth of free money, do nothing, or even exploiting the system and not contributing to the society or the wider community. And I was wondering if you had one or two sentences or something that I could grab onto as a hook, because people make that assumption, and I know it's wrong, and I would like to say something, and I'm not sure what to say exactly. So.
Thank you, Emily, for a good question. And often one of the more bigger questions or most common questions that come up. And when people say you get free money, it's not free money. I pay taxes. I've paid for my schooling. It varies, it varies. But when people say you don't pay taxes, it's a very narrow definition of what they define as taxable money, tax-free money. And it applies only to personal property or income located on reserve. Right. Other than that, we pay taxes. We pay everything else. And you have to often think, people think, oh, well, you still don't pay, taxes on reserve. You ever think, that's unfair. But the flip side of that, my family that live on reserve, they may not pay taxes now, but when an unresolved comes, when they have to retire, they think about CPP, not being able to claim for that, because you're not putting into it. Right, and thinking different pensions and things like that, putting that into. So, they have to then think about putting money away on top of that. So either way, you're trying to put money away for retirement, for savings. So we pay taxes, and even when you break down the numbers roughly of those that can pay tax across Canada, you take, you subtract the ones that are from, say 0 to 14 years of age. You take into account any First Nations that have gone to agreements with government to get rid of their tax exemption agreements. You're only looking roughly at about 270,000 people that don't pay tax. It's not like the full 1 million people at the quotation of Aboriginal people across Canada. But again, there's the benefits back and forth of that.
And with most First Nations, there is very little employment available on reserve. So you're talking about people who would be below the level of having to pay tax anyways. From a Métis perspective, what Christy is talking about, what you are talking about, is something that is entrenched in treaty rights. And remember, when I showed those brief slides, the Métis did not enter into treaties. So the issues of tax do not apply to Métis at all. I've paid tax from the day I started working when I was 18, and I've paid for all my education, so it's a very different situation. And I think most Canadians don't understand these very critical distinctions.
Thank you. Thank you for coming forward, Emily. Another question?
Hello, my name is Al Duerr. I'm a local author. I have an online presentation which is repeat of something I did here at the Public Library a year ago called No Sangreal. It's an examination of myths in society today, in culture. What I see as our primary human rights problem in Canada is that we have a fundamentally and infinitely unequal relationship between institutions and individuals. individuals today are barred by Canadian law from finding any enhanced way to have their cells divided. So in practical terms, we don't have the right to exist. A corporation or a church or a government or a story can live forever as long as someone gives it money. An individual can't. I think the way we have to look at this is, as someone who creates art, who creates stories, find a way to tell a different story. Give us some other form of entertainment that we can base a society on that is healthy. If you look in popular culture today, there's a raft of shows that are not really about human beings at all. They're about institutions condensed into characters and that feed off humans. We have to have a different relationship between art and the way that it supports institutions. I'm open for anybody who wants to have somebody talk on a panel. I'd be all for it. I've got this thing up online, but I find the material is so disturbing for people to address that it usually takes about a year for them to start listening to the talk after they're first exposed to it. Because people essentially have a fear of abundance. If they want to get something at vastly reduced cost or become vastly more productive, it's a shock to the system, and it takes time, it takes repeated exposure to get used to it. Thank you for doing this presentation today. I think that all the issues that we have with the problems of Native people are the most extreme examples of human rights abuses in Canada, but they're examples of things that happen to everyone.
Thank you very much.
I guess my question is how to pursue legal terms. How do I find people who are more interested in the same things that I have, and how to get human rights on the forefront?
Thank you very much. It was a little hard. I think the question was more one about how we get human rights forward. Yeah.
Sorry, I had a really difficult time hearing you. My colleagues were trying to clarify the question. How do you get people involved? Well, you said you have a blog. I think social media is an incredibly powerful way to get people involved and to create a dialogue. Forums like this are very, very important. And I think it's important to engage diverse voices in the conversation and in the discourse. It's absolutely critical that we talk about these issues. When we have the opportunity to neutralize myths when we actually talk about them in an open, honest way. When we have a question and we're uncomfortable asking it, to have a forum in which we can ask that question. Things like, so what is this myth of free money that Justin Bieber was talking about? What are these myths and misconceptions?
Thank you so much, Trevor, for kind of and informing us. I mean, what you're doing today obviously is going to help. I mean, getting out and involved in the community. I had no idea that's what you offered, and letting us know today, I think, is one of the ways you're going to get people involved. Is you have people of similar interests in this room to what you're looking into, and I think today is a great opportunity for you to go around and talk to people about this and engage people in discussions. Human rights, like I was saying earlier, is often not one of the topics that people sit around at the dinner table and talk about, and it should be. We shouldn't be afraid to approach this topic and talk about it. We need to be more open and have these discussions. And I really do think GlobalFest is a wonderful example that's held every year, and we're very fortunate to have people like Lynn and others that sponsor this event to have these discussions. And this, I think, is a really good way that Calgarians show that they care about this issue by having this yearly and showcasing this.
Thank you, Christy and Marie. Any further questions?
Hi, my name is Yvonne Lee, and I had the honor of being in a movie that the National Film Board did in the 1970s. Maria Campbell, who's a well-known Native Canadian author, had written a book, and the movie was based on that. We had the honor of the producer being the producer from Little Big Man in the States, who had won an award there. There was Tommy Banks was involved in it. people from the Beachcombers, for those of us who are old enough to remember the Beachcombers. So I was very honored when I was asked by Maria to be a part of this movie. And we opened the movie with having a medicine man bless the making of the movie. And that was my first time that I had ever been exposed to Native culture, because I was brought up in the foster care system. So in the foster care system in the 70s and 60s, you were only allowed to stay in one place for 6 months, and then you were moved. So they ended up changing that because of the damage it was doing to young people. But still, I was victimized very much in the foster care system. And I'm really concerned that the foster care system to date continues to use that as a tool against Natives, placing children in homes that are abusive, belittling them, driving them to the point of suicide. I'm just wondering if there is a central place in Calgary for healing, if there is a central place in Calgary for people who